Good morning. The tension between the role of policy and the role of institutions has already been mentioned by two of the persons on your panel. And let's not forget geography in all of this. And, you know, right or wrong, when there was more or less a consensus around the role of policy, whether it was effective or not, at least it was comforting that it gave a very clear guideline about what to do. The policymaker did not even require a degree in economics to be told what levers to pull and whether to push them up or down. At the other extreme, of course, the primacy of geography leaves you with nothing to do but throw your hands in the air. The question that this panel really has to address is where does an appreciation of the role of institutions in being a determining factor leave you in terms of policy implications, practical policy implications? So far, if one takes a look at the literature, it seems not to leave you with very much. And some of the challenges in applying an appreciation for the role of institutions to policymaking have begun to be addressed in the literature. And I will just itemize a few of them to see the discussion we're going to have today. One, as Acemoglu and others have argued, is that institutions tend to persist. That the institutions of today are part of the legacy of institutions that were established 200-300 years ago. Even though there was some evolution over time, there seems to be, certainly in his work, a strong argument in the view that institutions persist. And one would like to be more optimistic in believing that actions we take now are going to have some measurable effect within a time frame of 200 years. The second issue is that, for the most part, institutions are treated in a way that are not sufficiently disaggregated, with notable exceptions in the literature, Roderick being one of them. But much of the treatment of institutions has to do with some variable that represents a combination of the rule of law and property rights. And even in the cases where institutional quality is disaggregated into broad categories, it pretty much stops at broad categories. That we may address the quality of market institutions, but the mix between competition and regulation is not really usefully identified. And there may be a variable to represent participatory politics, but where does that get you in choosing between a Westminster-style democracy, proportional representation, and American-style presidential systems? A third challenge, which I think is highlighted in the work of Fukuyama, is that formal institutional design has very severe limits. And if not, then one would have a hard difficulty explaining the more than tenfold difference in per capita income between the United States and the Philippines, two countries which have largely similar formal institutional structures. And finally, another area which we are going to have to address in this discussion, and as we go forward in this line of thinking that has come to dominate the development literature, is that notwithstanding the Roma proposal to enfranchise the diaspora, that an appreciation of the role of institutions presents us with very few policy levers. Never mind how long it takes changes in institutions to be effective, the handles that you can pull are not clearly defined. And it seems to me that those issues actually speak to the question that is addressed in the Henry and Miller paper. That is the extent to which we draw the conclusion that Barbados and Jamaica have similar institutions or not. Susan has already pointed out that using current data, their institutional quality seems to be quite different, and we can only speculate based on that, and our knowledge that institutional quality and form persists, that back in 1960, they then likely had large differences in institutional quality as well. But I think there is considerable evidence that there are differences in institutional character and quality between Jamaica and Barbados. And if one takes the Acemoglu approach and looks back at the colonial experience, then you'll appreciate that in Jamaica, Jamaica was a colony of exploitation, to use the more popular term, that there was a high degree of absentee landlordism in Jamaica, where plantations were established. There was very little settlement of Europeans in Jamaica, and a vast slave population, and that set up a degree of inequality from 250 years ago that predisposed Jamaica to institutions of control and repression and not participation. Whereas in Barbados, from the beginning, there was a much greater degree of settlement, which is present today in the share of the population of European ethnicity that you see as you drive around Barbados. And that set up a different kind of political structure in Barbados, one that was more participatory from the beginning. And so when we come to independence in 1960, then, and universal suffrage has been extended in both countries, Jamaica manifested politics that can very well be explained by the median voter theory, that inequality incentivizes a politics of populism and redistribution, much more so than was the case in Barbados. And again, evidenced by the fact that in the near 50 years since independence in Jamaica, Jamaica has run a fiscal deficit in every single year except for 6. And in most of those years, large fiscal deficits, which has led to our experience with inflation and high debt. In Barbados, the fiscal deficits were much more balanced. And so I think that our agenda, the agenda that we face in this debate here, in the literature in general, and in discussing the Henry Miller paper, is an obligation to go from the aggregates that we understand now and to drill down much more deeply into how we can translate those into specific policy actions that are useful. Thanks.